Traditionally, we design in a rectangle. And that rectangle has a subterranean geometry. It has its own ordered relationships. First of all, we have a pair of vertical lines and a pair of horizontal lines, and where they intersect, we're going to call those eyes. Those are implicit. So those eyes relate to one another horizontally and vertically, and on the diagonal, they divide this in half. And if we divide this horizontally to establish an echo of that, and vertically to echo this, all of these rectangles have the same proportion as the mother. Any rectangle that has the same angle of a diagonal is the same proportion. So if this measures 1 by 1.5, which would be a 1.5 rectangle, these measure 1 by 1.5 as well, and if I continue breaking them down, they will continue to divide accordingly. So any rectangle that shares the same diagonal will have the same proportions, meaning that the shorter will divide into the longer the same number of times. There's a system of design called the golden section, in which we have golden sections, series rectangles, and we have root rectangles. I'm going to show you one. In the 7th lecture, we will discuss it at length, and in the 9th lecture, we will carry on even further. But it consists initially of taking a square, finding the half, and swinging that down with a compass and establishing a rectangle that has the proportions of just about the whole of nature inherent in it. I don't know that I'm going to draw everything slightly distorted because I want to stay out of your way so you can see what I'm doing. These calipers are calibrated on the ratio of the whirling squares. And if I open this up this way, that pretty much does, did I do something wrong? That pretty much gives us the square and the ratio. Do you see it? If I take the diagonal of that and I intersect it at 90 degrees from a corner, and I bring that vertical down at that square, because that will give us that division again. There it is. All the bones in my hand are based on that ratio, and the rest of nature is. So what you have to understand is that early man, presumably, I wasn't there. Old I am, but not that old. Early man must have sat in his unheated cave, lacking air condition or room service, with meteorites pounding the earth, earthquakes stirring up all kinds of havoc, wondering who was running the show. And he had to placate this someone, or group of somebodies, these gods on some hill someplace. So he examined everything in nature. Everything he could get his hands on, he measured. And what he discovered was there was a ratio proportion in forming everything in nature. And he assumed, presumably, that he'd decoded the language of his gods. Needing the cooperation and the protection of his gods, he built temples based on this ratio. He put altars in the temples designed on this ratio. He put vessels for libations on the altar tables based on this ratio. When he put effigies of his gods in his temples, they were based on this ratio, because the ratio, the geometry he employed, was in effect a prayer. All of Muslim art is based on these systems. All of African secret systems and mysteries are based on these ratios. The Egyptians used it, the Assyrians used it, the Greeks, the Italians, the Renaissance, everybody used it. And yet today, while most of the major older artists do employ it and pretend that they don't, and will not discuss it, and certainly almost none of them will teach it in the schools that our students go to study in. Younger students are not being taught this, and it is in fact the basis of Western, Asian, African art. You don't put a line down unless you know where you're going to put it in a rectangle. You don't put the line down unless you know how long it's going to be. You have to know what direction it's going in. Is it the Baroque? Is it the sinister?